Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode number 88 of FinalBossTV, your wild and game rating show. I'll be your host. My name's Adam, aka Bay, and today we are one episode away from completing the Warlord junket. Had to do a little flippity-floppity, floopity-floop, because people are like raiding. Like there's some boss right now that has to be killed that's been killed twice only in the world. It's called like Archimendon or something like that. I don't know, who knows what it is. But wore my blue shirt today. Also got blue boxes on, representing the Enhancement Shaman episode we had going today. Sitting down with returning guest, and one new one that you may have heard about. He's doing some things on the internet now and writing about stuff. So without further ado though, who are our guests today? Well, you could read above the screen, but if not, returning to the show since Mob, there's Purge. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Are you ready for this?
I suppose. I think this show is gonna be a bit more pessimistic than the last one, but we'll see.
Yeah, that's probably a good word to describe the show. So, yeah. Got your cat pictures at the ready, though. They'll be rotating them throughout the show. I'm sure chat room will be, all hail the pumpkin cat. And joining us on this show as well will be Werdup. There you are. Hello, sir. How you doing?
Hello. I'm good.
You ready for this? You all set?
I am. Possibly a little bit more optimistic than Purge, but only just. Only just.
Only just. Yeah. A little bit. Just a little bit. All right, that's fine. It's understandable. We're in a weird place right now, gentlemen, and only doing a two-guest show because I sort of count as a guest, I guess, sort of, maybe. I've been playing Enhancement Shaman for a little bit, like 19 years, I think. You know, since like, you know, beta negative 17, you know, I worked on internal. Yeah, you know, it's fine. It's fine. Back when we had two-hander, rest in peace, two-hand Enhancement Shaman. Moment of silence? All right, that's enough. So I want to jump right in. Huh?
Two-handed tanking Enhancement Shaman?
Yeah.
Tanking as well.
Well, how would you... We had shield specialization back in the day, but it had to have a shield equipped. You had shield block back in the vanilla incarnation, so... Yep. I want to go right into this because we have a whole lot of stuff to get to, and I think a lot of the first part of the show is going to be a lot of conjecture, more of like theory and discussion craft before we get into more mathy stuff. So sort of a breakdown of Warlords real quick, in your experience, opinions, Hellfire Citadel so far. We'll graze past Tier 17 a little bit, but how is Hellfire Citadel looking so far from your perspective, Word? What do you think so far?
It's not too bad. There's enough fights where we can do something. It's just not great. We aren't bringing anything that other people don't bring. We aren't really breaking any encounters, so it's kind of hard to justify to some extent. But it's a good raid. I enjoy it, and I've had fun playing with the encounters. They've definitely been interesting ones.
Right. A little better than we had in Siege of Orgrimmar 2.0, would you say?
Yes.
I hope a little better at least. I mean, going from orcs to a little bit of ogres and then back to orcs again was probably not the best decision, but
it's a different color this time. It's green.
It's a different color.
So we've definitely got some extra flavor going on.
Damn it. That's the main thing now. A different color makes a totally different content, right? Yeah. So, yeah, do you think there's any pitfalls? Like, I'm going to bring this up too to Purge and he'll open us up. Have you noticed that there's a lot of like reused mechanics in Hellfire Citadel, Purge? What do you think of the new raid?
It seems to be shaping up pretty good. I haven't seen as much of it on Mythic as Werdup has, but I mean, as far as how fun the encounters are, I agree that Enhancement's specialty, sustained AoE, isn't really what is defining a lot of these encounters. Like, a lot of them will flood you with meaningless ads like Hellfire Assault, but killing the Iron Dragoons quickly isn't what's going to lead to success on that fight. It's just who alters who wins the meter.
Right. Yeah. Like, it doesn't... Granted, we'll gain a little bit of damage on, like, priority ads if there are Iron Dragoons up, but in all respect, it doesn't matter that they die. Because they're going to anyway. So it's just like an empty part of the encounter. But people now think like, oh, Enhancement Shaman's fine. You get to AoE all the trash and all these bosses that have all these ads and stuff. And it doesn't. Like, Iskar, you can be fine without Enhanced Shaman. Because you've got mages, warriors, rogues, frost DKs. Good to go. Right? Like, nothing...
Iskar's probably like, we can be good. We've got something to us. It's just that what we lose in exchange for being able to do all this AoE is so noticeable once it goes away, or if you just took those ads out, that I think there are a lot of people who've noticed that you don't even play the class, I'm sure by now, that when you play with one, suddenly the single target's just not there at all.
Right.
We've got these massive cooldowns that last for ages, and so you have to spend all this time planning it, and it can go wrong over something that's completely out of your control, which is really frustrating as well.
Yeah. But Purge, our single target's been buffed over and over and over again, right?
Mm-hmm. It's not as bad as it used to be. It's true.
Well, I want to bring this up. Where did as the Band-Aid buffs we always keep getting is Lava Lash and Storm Strike. And they keep getting, like, a little bit better every, like, couple of, like, iteration patches, I guess. Where did we start out with the percentage modifier on Storm Strike and Lava Lash, and where is it at now, to put it in perspective for all the shamans in chat?
When Warlords started, when the first builds are coming up for public consumption on the alpha and beta, I think Storm Strike was around 160% weapon damage. It got nerfed down to 120% after that. That was its low point, and now it's all the way up to 480%. So it's had a little bit of a journey.
A little bit of a journey, if that's what you want to call it. Yeah, and we're still basically bottom 5 specs, depending on what percentage you look at in the entire game. For single target, anyway.
For single target, yeah.
Which
like
is
fights like Hellfire Assault. I mean, they show that. It's what we are still very, very good at sustained AoE.
Sure.
And if there were more fights like Tectus, Phase 3 Mythic Tectus, or Imperator Margok, then they wouldn't have to change anything necessarily about the spec, and it would still be valuable. But Hellfire doesn't really have a fight that I've seen so far, at least, that's similar to Tectus or Margok, where that AoE damage is something that you want to have or is very valuable.
Right. And then I'm going to play...
At least in the way that we offer it. Like, there are because there are other classes that can just... They outburst us on AoE, like, say, an Arms Warrior Blade Storming or a Demo Warlock.
Yeah.
Exploding on everything.
I mean, Doom Nova, Arcane
but,
Mages.
if the things last for a long time, we'll catch up and even pass them, like you can see on something like Hellfire Assault. But on something like the Cormrock hands, like they'll just shoot way ahead of us.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, you only get
again, but on Cormrock, it's like those ads, like their burst AoE DPS is so
much more important,
strangely tuned, I would say, in terms of like I don't think there's anything as imbalanced right now as burst AoE DPS is in terms of the gap between the best and the worst. Like if you have the warriors and the Demo Warlocks on Cormrock, those hands will just instantly die.
Correct.
Like they're just gone. They're not part of the fight anymore. So it's really just a question of putting as much damage into the boss as you can. Even though you could win the meters by doing the hands, the boss is what really counts there.
Yep. No, it's a trap. A lot of Hellfire Citadel fights are traps. It's
all over Hellfire for that, yeah.
Yeah.
We get it, and we can't do anything else. That's the only thing we can do. And so if it's not important, then we're not important by extension because we don't bring anything else. Like, everyone else has got that thing where if the damage isn't good, you can still bring them for that thing that they do, but we don't have that at all at the moment. That's gone since...
That Gorfine's Grasp or that Rallying Cry or whatever.
I mean, we had it in MOC with Guidance and Stormlash, so there was a reason to bring Shaman, even if the damage wasn't in the greatest spot, which, despite that, we still were in MOC. Now both of those have gone, effectively, and our damage has been going down and down for versatility in terms of the different fights that we have to do.
Right.
I don't know what you're talking about. AG is still in my spell book.
Oh man, I mean, you're getting one topic ahead, but I love bringing up that ancestral guidance, which was buffed, quote unquote, and is only good for elemental and enhancement to use during periods of heavy cleave or crazy AOE. But in doing so, to help your raid out, you normally lag out everyone else because of the input lag variance for that 8 seconds or so. So, yay.
Yeah, the input lag's
Yay.
definitely been a thing
Yeah.
this tier.
I don't even know either, too, because like I never raided a whole bunch of the 30-man heroic stuff. Like we never had that many raiders and all the time, and I didn't notice it much because I wasn't really paying attention to like caring about trying to like min-max or scumbag AG to make helpful bursts of healing. But I can't imagine trying to with 30 people, because at that many people you even compound on the input lag, because you're not with 20 in a mythic, you have 10 more bodies. So I can only imagine, because I was told to stop doing it on Cormrock because I would lag the healers and the tanks out, and they couldn't like reactively move the boss or active mitigate for like that 8 seconds because of just like the. And that's the only thing we really have quote unquote. So, but I was gonna bring we're at like the Fire Nova topic right now, and I'll put devil's advocate here. The one time that we've seen Enhanced Shaman like shine on arguably like any real big boss in particular was Mythic Imperator, Mythic Cho'Gall specifically, where Iliao crushed it, and then immediately Blizzard nerfs Fire Nova. Like the next reset, they nerf Fire Nova, so that no one else in the world could take advantage of Enhanced Shamans being worth a damn on that part of the fight.
I wouldn't call it that. I wouldn't say they nerfed it that much. They took the number. They nerfed the number of flame shocks that could explode by 1, I think.
Yes, they from 7 to 6.
So I mean that was a noticeable nerf, but it wasn't like kill Enhancement Shaman. Enhancement was still very good for that fight.
Right, but then it shortened the gap between your.
Oh yeah,
At the
it
time,
wasn't. We
Demonology
weren't like head
Warlords
and shoulders above the other
Right.
AOE specs necessarily anymore after that, but we were still a top spec for sure.
Right. It just seems weird that like one time, and they just opened the show with like time to shine on the meters. Like once we get a little bit of that, it gets nerfed. So, which is kind of how Demonology Warlocks feel, even though Demonology Warlocks are still like the best spec once you get the ring. So yeah,
And they still have Destro as well if
they
it's
still have Destro.
too terrible.
Yep. We just don't have anything. So, like, what's the problem with Fire Nova? Like, it's the problem child we've dealt with. We've wanted it to be better for, like, 3 expansions in a row. It used to be a totem, the Fire Nova totem, that was, like, the old Magma totem, just, like, pulsed and, like, farted like Fire Nova's. Like, it was terrible. Like, what should it remove, change, reworked? Like, how... Because it hinders us in a balance standpoint, because apparently we're too good.
It shouldn't be the be-all, end-all of our tools, because that's what it feels like at the moment. It's like all of the work and effort into finding mechanics that Enhancement can deal with. The only one that's been properly developed is Fire Nova. It's got interaction with other spells. It does a lot of damage. It's got unique design to the way it deals damage and scales up and down with mobs. But then there's nothing else. Everything else is just buttons that don't interact with anything else.
Right.
And it's like it's almost like there's too much fear to giving anything else, because if Fire Nova's really good and then we've got really good cleave and our single target's good, then we're suddenly the best DPS, and that's not a solution either.
It'd be an
That
Arms
doesn't
or a
fit
Fury
balance.
Warrior.
Yeah.
Or a Rogue. Or a Mage. Heaven forbid.
Yeah. I would say that I don't think Fire Nova is really a problem right now. Like he said, it's one of the best developed. It's one of the best developed packages that Enhancement has in terms
Right.
of the interaction between various spells. You got, Lava Lash spreading Flame Shock, which erupts into the Fire Novas, and like you said, depending on the number of targets, you've got some exponential damage scaling there. So that's a unique, thing for Enhancement where high targets good, low targets bad. Personally, I think that's enough of a self-balancing system right there that you don't also need to nerf single target damage, but whatever.
Right.
You got Unleash Flame, balancing act between how long are these mobs going to live. Should I buff my Flame Shock or should I buff my Fire Nova? Like, there's good systems going on there. There are good spell interactions going on there. There's things to think about. There's things to set up. and when the situation is right, it does pay off.
Sure.
I think, like we were saying before, though, I think the issue is just that the way things are currently tuned, we have so many eggs in that one specialty basket, and right now that specialty isn't being applied often enough in the raids that we're seeing, at least. And I mean, this is just an issue where it's like the timetables we're looking at, where it's like, okay, here's a raid, have fun in it for 6 months. If this raid wasn't good for you, try the next one. You know, like High Mall was good for us with Tectus and Margok. Blackrock Foundry was less good for us. It wasn't entirely awful though. This raid, pretty bad, from what I would say.
just pretty bad. Yeah.
Well, we've got a niche that's so extremely specific as to what it is, with high target, sustained AoE, and we've not got anything else. That it's a really strange niche to put onto a hybrid that's got no alternative specs
Yeah,
to change into. That's the same gear. I mean, the closest we've got, we could change to Elemental, who's ironically their best niche is sustained AoE on high targets,
Right.
with different problems that they have to deal with compared to us, and they suffer from relatively similar issues. Their single target isn't amazing, but they can't pay off with the AoE in any situations effectively, sans a couple of bosses that show up here or there, which is usually not enough to justify bringing a class that's got nothing else.
Nothing else. Yeah.
that's I would say the biggest problem with Shaman right now is that there's so much overlap between what Elemental's supposed to be good at, what Enhancement's supposed to be good at. There's nothing I would say that really makes them unique other than, oh, Elemental's ranged, Enhancement's melee. Like that's pretty much what it boils down to, because like you said, Elemental's package is so much heavily weighted into Earthquake right now, where
Yeah.
like their package, they have the AoE package just like Enhancement does. There's lots of interaction between Chain Lightning, Earthquake, number of targets, all that stuff. That's a fine package. It's a little bit more narrow than Enhancement, kind of, in the sense that it's not mobile AoE.
Right.
But I mean, at the same time, it also works a lot better at low target numbers than Enhancement's package does. So there's a little bit of give and take there. But still, if there's a boss that has a high single target DPS check and you're a shaman, you just screwed up. You picked the wrong class. You can't swap specs to do anything different. You have to.
It's strange as well, because in Mists we had the single target thing we were really good at that, and we started to see Fire Nova. Yeah, Burst was really good.
Mostly because our burst was so good, we got ahead of other people, and then we kind of that evened us out. Yeah, but continue. Go ahead.
So we rode the wave of the burst, but we had really good single target, and we had really, really good cooldowns that could be used on targets. So we had effectively quite good priority damage as well. Whilst Elemental, on the other hand, had really good AoE with the Chain Lightning that they had, which worked on low and high targets. So why that changed, transitioning into Warlords, is baffling personally, because it wasn't something that needed to be changed. I mean, I remember at the beginning of Siege we did ask that we needed some more AoE, and Fire Nova got its damage doubled, I think, almost, and still wasn't the best spell, but it was good enough to use. But then for Warlords, they took that to the complete nth degree and removed nearly all the good single target burst aspects, and they just cooked it all into Fire Nova, and no one asked for that.
There's a bit of an interesting history there that I would like to just briefly touch on in that.
Sure.
I think the issue was Enhancement's AoE back then, like today, very good on high target numbers. Not as good as it was today, but a lot of people back then complained about the setup involved.
Sure.
Right? Back then, you had to apply Flame Shock, spread it, and it only spread 4 at a time, then not 6 at a time.
Right.
Flame Shock didn't reset Lava Lash's cooldown, so if you messed up the spread, Lava Lash was on cooldown for like 10 seconds before you could try again, and didn't scale with haste, So, and then you would Fire Nova. Your first Fire Nova wouldn't really be that strong because Flame Shock would only be on 4 targets. Lava Lash's cooldown would tick all the way down, then you could spread again, and then you could get into start doing big AoE.
Yeah.
So, like, I think they listened to the feedback there where that setup took a really long time, right? So now, all of a sudden, Lava Lash spreads 6 flame shocks, and now it's Fire Nova's capped at exploding on 6 flame shocks. So, you get one spread off, you're at your max potential, right? So, like that there is a huge, scaling down of the setup time. On top of the fact that just baseline Flame Shock resets a Lava Lash's cooldown, so if you mess up, you're not as punished because you'll still have some Flame Shocks out.
Yep.
On top of Flame Shock, or the cooldowns of Lava Lash and Fire Nova also scaling with haste, again, meaning that if you mess up one cooldown, you're not as punished because those cooldowns will be coming back sooner. And all those changes, combined to make our AoE package very, very strong, especially during the beta when Fire Nova didn't even have a cap.
That was fun.
That was a little bit too insane, right? And I think the issue was during the beta, they looked at this Fire Nova and they said, okay, that's cool. It's got that exponential scaling thing. We can work this into being some, sort of, specialty. And I think they just went with it at that point. I mean, I don't know for sure, but it makes sense, right? Because in the transition, I mean, we lost a lot of single targets, so like it made sense that okay, maybe their single target isn't as good as last expansion, but their AoE is like insane. Like this can probably work, and in Highmaul it kind of did, but in Blackrock not so much, and especially in Hellfire, I would say especially it isn't really working out too well.
I guess I don't feel like, from a design standpoint, from the outside looking in through the window, I don't understand why they would overly credit a class with quote-unquote the strongest sustainable AoE, but then each raid has like a boss that it matters on, so that almost always devalues that class in any sort of real sort of progression, because you're only good on like one boss, really.
Well, and you also have to look at what the spec does outside of raiding. Like in PvP, Fire Nova, I mean, unless you're doing some huge battleground or Ashran, like World PvP, where there's like just this huge cluster of people, you're probably not going to be Fire Novaing that much. So it's all about single target damage.
Correct.
Enhancement single target damage isn't good. So what does Enhancement do? It casts Lightning Bolt a hell of a lot less and just uses Healing Surge for their Maelstrom weapon. So their off healing's good, which makes people complain that they're very tanky with the cooldowns that we have. With Shamanistic Rage, short cooldown, high duration. So we're tanky. We got a lot of spot healing. We purge spam because why spend a GCD doing something that's going to do an irrelevant amount of damage when you could dispel a hot? Like dispelling a hot, that's way more effective damage than any button you could push.
Right. Yeah, I mean, well, purging off a powered shield is like what, 60 to 80,000 damage technically at this point. So
it ties into the other utility that we have, or quote unquote utility, with grounding totem and capacitor totem and earthbind and windwalk and all the other things that you could call utility, but they're not raid utility. It's not something that you're going to think we have to have 5 of these to do the encounter.
Right.
It's more like it's worse than the alternatives that other people can bring, but their class also has a better damage package than we do, so it compounds that. So what our utility is, it shines in PvP because there's opportunities to use it, but in PvE it really shines a light on how little we have because we never get to use it. Like grounding totem works on nothing, capacitors much worse than the AoE stuns because it's got the setup time.
Right.
Earthbind's got a long cooldown and is nowhere near as good as, say, the alternatives like Chillblains and Infected Wounds and things like that. So the PvP to PvE disparity is really obvious because they can't balance those two around lots of small utility versus giving us raid utility that we can use.
Yeah. No, it is totally true. And that's the weird... We're like a weird impasse right now where we're like good at the opposite things in the different echelons of the game, right? Like if we're tanky and we can off heal well, and we have good usage of like cooldowns and totems in a way for like the PvP scene, but that doesn't like matter in raiding. Like our healing doesn't matter because it was nerfed and nerfed again, and we tried to like bring it back a little bit, but then again the earlier topic of like the one thing we can do to help off heal lags your raid out, so you're usually asked to not do it. And then grounding totem doesn't matter in raids. We can grounding totem like the shadow bolts on Socrathar by the ads, like woohoo. We could
and most of the time when something meaningful can be grounding totemed, it was an oversight, and that gets quick fixed. It's like, I feel like they could, if they wanted to, they could design things around grounding totem and spell reflect more often than they do, which is basically never. And that could be something that shamans and warriors bring that other people don't bring, but for whatever reason, that design space hasn't really been explored, or hasn't been explored since Burning Crusade, when you reflected pyroblasts into Kael'thas's face.
Yeah,
I mean, the amount of times I've used our utility things, this expansion, let alone, I mean, I've not tremored since Trash on High Mall. Windwalk's got a single really good utility on Gorefiend with the essences, but that's pretty much it. Everything else is a non-issue that it does, and Stampeding Roar does the same, but significantly better. And you can use Stampeding Roar on nearly everything. Now, like, obviously the solution isn't to give us that, but it just shines a light on the gulf between what is our utility and what everyone else's is.
Right. Yeah. Binks in chat noting that we should have a flashing sign that, as we talk about these kind of things, it should say applies to elemental as well. But I mean, yeah, obviously it's more of a shaman issue. Now the flip flop, of course, though, is that, like, just to briefly touch on it, like restoration has been like buffed and buffed and buffed, and it's wonderful now. But like, so obviously we're not going to be talking about going resto, and we'll talk about them in a catch up episode in the future here. But they're wicked good. Whereas the DPS versus the shaman are kind of like wicked bad, just by a pure number standpoint. But we talked about some, like, how useful totems are, and they're so few and far between. And we know Blizzard had said, like, they want to, like, revisit the totem meta in MOP, and they said, like, we'll revisit the totem meta in Warlords, and, like, nothing's changed. So Purge, you had an idea, a couple ideas for, like, new totems that would be really, really good.
Well, they don't necessarily need to be totems, but
Sure.
Just looking at the talent tree, like, and we talked about this a little bit earlier with ancestral guidance, but you look at that tier of talents. You have ancestral guidance, which situationally does something at least. And then you have rushing streams, which literally just doesn't exist, and you have conductivity, which literally just doesn't exist.
Correct.
That tier could be totally redesigned for the DPS specs.
For elemental enhancement,
at least.
Yes.
Like, maybe that's an okay tier for resto, I don't know. But for elemental enhancement, that could be another utility tier where they could toss us some different totems maybe, or different utility spells, or whatever they wanted to do. Like, the specifics aren't as important as just the idea of it happening. But, like, for example, when they were first making the talent tree, before they had Windwalk Totem there was another totem called Repulsion Totem. That sounded like a cool thing at the time. It got cut. But, I mean, something like that could be cool. There's just, like, basically Shaman doesn't have a thing that's unique-ish to Shaman, and I don't mean that in the sense that, oh my god, if we don't have a shaman, we're just screwed. It's just that there's nothing. Shamans don't have a equivalent to, say, a Death Knight's Gorfiend's Grasp, or a Priest's Life Grip, or like a Rallying Cry, or something that's unique to
Smoke Bomb.
Something. There's no, like, nobody else brings this.
Correct.
Like, I feel like something should be done in that direction. Like, right now, a lot of our, like, we have a huge assortment of totems, which, as Werdup said, they're not meaningful. Like, Grounding Totem, especially, is just completely forgotten about in PvE. Like, there's no, and especially Grounding Totem, like, sometimes you can ground or reflect some irrelevant spell that somebody casts, and it's like, okay, cool, I guess. But like, there's no visual, feedback that that's going on. Like, it doesn't show up in your combat log like as damage that you did or
Yep.
prevented. You know, like I feel like
Yep.
work could be done a lot on grounding totem specifically because it is something that's kind of unique to shaman that it's just never used.
Yep.
Like that could be buffed up or built up a lot more than it is. And
Yeah,
like,
absolutely.
and again, specifics don't matter, just chucking out ideas, but like you could have something like a pillar of earth that rises from the ground and creates like on a cooldown that just creates a small localized area of line of sight, or any other spell that you can just think of something that nobody else really brings
Yeah.
and could be situationally useful.
Yep.
I don't know.
That's the thing with Shaman is it is so easy to come up with an idea for it because there's all these elements they can just pull something from and you just slap a mechanic on it and I'm sure you can find an element that'll work with it and do that. So the ideas are there. It just they need to capitalize on them and give us one of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
that
like
if they
various
can't
creatures.
get the
Yeah,
sorry.
various creatures in dungeons and in the world have like cool shamanistic abilities that are like, oh, why doesn't the player have something like that?
Right.
I don't know. Like the lightning tether ability in Halls of Lightning,
Yeah.
which is, relevant because of the time walking going on right now. Like that would have been a cool ability. I don't know.
Yeah. There's a lot
The
of
thing the
things.
thing where you move and you take damage if you move. I don't know. Nobody really has anything like that. That'd be cool.
Yeah.
I mean, they're all options that are there so that if they do get the class balance wrong again, like it has been this tier in particular,
Right.
there is still something that you can fall back on and say, well, at least I bring this that will be useful on some fights because as soon as you get to the brass tacks of things with classes, that's what makes or breaks raid spots for a lot of people in melee is do they bring something no one else does that we can abuse on this fight? And if the answer is no, it becomes a lot harder to find a spot that's consistently there for them when they're competing with other people.
Yeah. There's just a lot of empty space. Whereas I don't, and what I'll agree with Purge too is, and with Werdup is that I don't think that every class needs to have like a homogenized version of every cool ability, but they tried giving like Amp and Fox so that hunters had something or mages had something, and obviously there became certain amounts of too powerful instances of spells that don't exist anymore. Well, because Fox was very stackable, and Amp was very, very potent with huge raid cooldown throughput CDs that was just unnecessary, over tune certain parts of encounters. But
I would I would say that giving hunters and mages those abilities in the first place was just a bit misguided. Like I know they complain about not having utility abilities in the traditional sense. Like
traditional sense, yeah,
in the traditional sense, sure, but hunters and mages still bring so much utility to the raid in being able to cheese mechanics.
yeah, immune debuffs,
Like
soak different things, yeah,
that's a huge thing that they and rogues most often are able to do.
yep,
And that even though that's not necessarily a single ability that is utility to the raid, it's something that is so often incredibly valuable, which is why those classes are never really in any danger of not being brought to especially the difficult end bosses where those things usually pop up.
yeah. Because to move us along a little bit, like Enhancement Shaman right now has really good single target and almost like scumbaggy burst, but then our damage is literally shit afterwards. Or we go heavy AoE damage, which is very sustainable. It only works on very, very few fights. But then our cleave and obviously our single target again are not good. So like, is this intended design goal that we think that they're leaving us in this like huge AoE rut? I mean, I have a couple class examples here of like the power creep. Hunters have a pre-execute and an execute, and can DPS from ranged. And as marksman is the flavor of the month right now, or the flavor of the patch, they also DPS from further away. Warriors and Rogues get simple one-click AoE abilities that just happen with 0 setup time. And then literally Blade Flurry is a toggle. You know, Death Knights get free AoE and Cleave just as part of their kit while they're doing their regular rotation. It just happens. You know, no setup again. Talking about like what is, have they just like forgotten, or is the power creep become a little bit too
The thing with the single target thing is it segues into the gear stuff, but it's really strange this tier because they've given us bonuses and trinkets that are sustained single target. So we talent away from the burst. So then we don't get that wave at the beginning that we can ride to the end of the fight. We just do average damage all the time now, which isn't fun.
Sub-average.
I've got to be honest. Yeah. And then if you compare us to the other melee who's got an AoE niche, which would be combat rogues, like a really strong AoE niche, they operate in such a much more versatile way with their AoE because they have it as a burst, they have it as sustained, they have cooldowns that interact with their AoE, which is something that we completely lack because our cooldowns are purely single target. And they scale up from one mob all the way up to however many mobs are near them.
right? Yeah.
And back down with no negative aspects at all. And their maintenance is simply putting Blade Flurry on and doing what they normally do.
Yeah. And that's the thing too. To maximize AoE effectiveness in our niche, we actually like sacrifice more single target damage. You know, at a certain cap, obviously if you have 6 Novas going and they're all hitting the primary target or the boss, it's actually a DPS gain, sort of, but you again lose out other abilities that have to be set back on cooldown, whereas other classes don't have anything. So that sort of leads that.
I mean, I would say in that regard, Enhancements package is the best designed in that you are forced to think about other things going on.
Sure.
I would say a lot of those other melee setups are just a little bit too simple in that AoE sense right now. I mean, for a lot of casters, like they have, you know, they have to change things up when AoE starts going on or multi-target stuff starts going on, like you know, multi-dotting or you know, elemental with their chain lightning, earthquake stuff, and like it's pretty good on that front, I would say. Demonology warlocks just exploding with everything that you know their resource pools allow them to do.
Sure.
I don't know.
It's the AoE that we have, I think, is design-wise is one of the best because of how intuitive it is, but that doesn't extend at all to the single target aspect. We don't have interactions in the way that we deal single target. Our cooldowns don't interact with each other, let alone really with us. I mean, Ascendance, we press it and we become ranged, but we still do what we normally do. And since we need to keep up on single target damage, we can't abuse the ranged aspect anywhere near as much as I'd like to. And same goes for Fire Elemental. That doesn't scale with anything we do. The closest we've got to a cooldown that scales with everything is Elemental Mastery, which we've been pushed away from with the new gear that they've given us.
Right. I mean, you can argue that Liquid Magma, obviously, because it scales with Haste and Mastery and Multi-Strike and Crit, I guess. But there's also
most abilities scale with all the stats.
Sure. But
it's that we don't buff up our stats or our percent damage we're doing or anything like that in any way. We're always doing the same damage or modifying the way we do the damage in some way, but it's through unusual methods that it happens, so they never interact with each other.
That does lead into another topic, I would say, which was basically how weak our single target abilities feel like they hit for, you know?
Right.
And like a big part of that is just being a little bit undertuned. But another part of it is what he's talking about with the cooldowns, where like, okay, you pop Fire Elemental, right? And you just have another guy auto attacking away, sitting next to you. It's like there's no +% damage from the player going on there. Like it's not Avenging Wrath, you know, plus you know X% damage while it's up. So like you don't get those big hits that other specs get, and then especially Ascendance. It's like the closest one to that with the armor ignore, but like plus 50% to Storm Strike. Storm Strike doesn't hit that hard, so plus 50% Storm Strike also doesn't really hit that hard.
Doesn't hit that hard. Yeah.
Like, if you compare Wind Strike, which is the Ascendant's version of Storm Strike, to abilities that other melee just use rotationally, like Wind Strike hits as hard or less than rotational abilities in every other melee spec except for Unholy Death Knights. Wind Strike only beats Unholy Death Knight's big rotational strike. So it's like if these melee are able or are balanced around being able to use something that can hit harder than Wind Strike, and it's not even tied to a 3-minute cooldown,
Exactly.
then I kind of wonder why our abilities have to be so weak.
Yeah.
Well, it's when you compare it to the other classes, we don't go anywhere with our damage. Our finisher is technically Lightning Bolt that we build up to, but that barely hits harder than, well, if you exclude our 4-piece, barely hits harder than our normal abilities. Whereas other classes, they may have some that hit really weak, but then it builds up to an enormous hit. Like you compare us to, say, a Feral Druid, their Shred is not that far off the damage that a Storm Strike's doing, but then they build up to a Ferocious Bite that's like 5 times the damage that a Storm Strike or a Lava Lash is going to do. And we never spike at all. We stay on a flatline DPS outside of our cooldowns. And even then, we mostly are propped up by things that aren't done by us.
Yeah.
It's just what we've summoned to do it. The same goes for Feral Spirits and Fire Elemental.
And the flatline, too, is something we still suffered from, we talked about back in MOP. And that is, does Enhancement Shaman still suffer from the damage source bloat? And having way too many knobs to tweak, causing issues of balancing in the long run. Like, I'm pretty sure I haven't, like, dived in to make sure that this is completely empirical, but we have still the most damage sources of any class in the entire game. Still.
I know this point's been brought up before.
Right.
Even by Blizzard, I believe. And I think it's a little bit misleading in the sense that the number of abilities that you use, it affects, how many slices your pie is cut into.
Sure.
And if at the end of the day you're pushing buttons more frequently than other people are pushing buttons, then again, your abilities will hit for less than other people. But we don't really push buttons more frequently than some. We push buttons more frequently, I would say, than most specs, but not all specs. Like, I think Frost Death Knights, as just another example, push buttons about as frequently as we do.
Mm-hmm.
And they have abilities that hit way harder than ours do. And the big issue there is just the difference between cooldowns. Like, our cooldowns don't enhance our buttons. They're just extra sources of auto attacks. And then the other issue would just be that we still have a lot of sources of damage that just don't come from the Shaman. Again, the cooldowns, but also things like Searing Totem or Magma Totem or, stuff like that. And then further still, like, we have debuffs and, like, going back to the topic of we don't really have ways to interact with our single target rotation as much as we do with our AoE.
Sure.
Like the Storm Strike debuff, for example. Plus 25% chance for Lightning Bolt to crit or whatever it is.
Right.
Okay, that's one way to approach it. I mean, what if instead of plus crit chance, it was plus damage? Like, the spell would crit less often, but when it did crit, there would be a bigger number on your screen. They could tune it to be worth the same plus damage at the end, but at the end you would still get a bigger number.
Right. It's not even the big number argument too is because of how the raids are prioritized in a way where you need to be able to add damage to where it matters in encounters. And if the same damage is added all the time by Enhanced Shamans or even Elemental in this same thing, then what's the bonus? There's no bonus. Right? There's no gain. There's no possibility for gain. It's just the same thing all the time,
Yeah, go on.
It's like a lack of interaction that we have.
Yeah.
Once you take out the Fire Nova package, we do have a lot of damage sources. I think the biggest sources are cooldowns because, we suddenly get the Fire Elemental's abilities, Ascendance, Wind Strike, Wind Lash and Wind Strike, and you got Feral Spirit. So that's 6 sources that come out of pressing cooldowns instead of just being a cooldown that gives us more damage. So if that was changed instead to being, say, a cooldown that just we do extra damage, that would immediately solve this bloat that's been perceived to exist
Right.
without really changing anything. And then they can start to focus instead on making the single target rotation work with each other. So when you're pressing something, it feels like it's going to affect something else that you press, because the way we play is really fun. It's relatively fast paced. We press a lot of buttons, but it is just a fire and forget with almost every button. There's the only thing that we have is if we take Unleash Fury, and then we actually have got something that interacts with something else. Otherwise, we just press it and then we carry on and we press the next one, and it just cycles the entire fight like that.
I think it's worth emphasizing that the AoE setup is already really good in that sense. Like Lava
Sure.
Lash interacts with Flame Shock, Fire Nova, all that's good.
Mhm.
I would say what if in next expansion what they should focus on is trying to improve the way Storm Strike interacts with our single target. Because right now, like I said, that debuff, it's kind of lame. It's
Yep.
just extra crit chance. Like I would. Plus damage would be more fun, even if it wasn't necessarily more powerful at the end of the day. And even just the way the debuff is designed to have 100% uptime, there's no gameplay involved in that, and just always having that debuff there.
Yeah.
Like if it was designed to be less than 100% uptime, then all of a sudden how often you Storm Strike matters, because that will affect how much uptime you have on the buff or debuff or whatever.
Right.
And, if going into the cooldown argument, like you pop Ascendance. Okay. Does Wind Strike really have to be identical to Storm Strike in every way other than the armor ignore?
Right.
No. Like it could hit harder. It could it could apply, the Storm Strike debuff on steroids. There could be a lot of cool things going on there that just currently don't happen.
Nothing happens. Yeah.
Or, if you want to take the ability bloat argument a step further, do we need 2 Guardian Pet cooldowns? No. Okay. Like Fire Elemental, Feral Spirit, there's like a lot of redundancy there.
Yeah.
Okay. Take the Fire Elemental and even the Earth Elemental and the Storm Elemental away if you want. Elemental can be the Elemental tree. That makes thematic sense.
Sure.
And
Right.
you can give feral spirits their pet bar back, like Wrath of the Lich King. You could even borrow from the 4-piece idea where when you use feral spirit, you become a feral spirit and your own abilities are empowered.
Yep. Yeah,
they could do lots of things to make the cooldowns feel like they interact more with our single target rotation, so that you have to actually capitalize on these windows that you're presented with, instead of just, okay, I used Feral Spirit, they're auto attacking, no more interaction between it and me.
Yeah, we
Like,
lost our
actually
pet bar too, so we can't even.
Yeah, well, the thing is with our current pet cooldowns especially, there's actually like anti-skill interaction going on there, where it's like
Right.
they're just passive auto attackers for the most part. The only thing that the shaman does that really affects them is there's elemental mastery, obviously, but if you're not talented into that, then you don't have that. But there's also Unleash Wind, which buffs their attack speed. If you're in melee range, you'll eat through your Unleash Wind charges. Gone. But if you're not in melee range, you can Unleash Wind, and they'll have the attack speed buff for the full duration. So it's like if you're not in range, you can buff the damage they're doing a little bit.
Right.
Until you get back into melee range, and then you eat all your charges.
And then you're essentially nerfing your pet and having no interaction with them at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's important. It's important to make those windows more important, more opportunities for people to either take advantage of it or not take advantage of it based on skill. Because if you look at, the difference between, if you go to Heroic Fellord Zakun, if you look at an Enhancement Shaman at, say, like the 30th percentile, they're like almost middle of the pack, kind of respectable-ish. If you go higher and higher up the skill tree, like 95th percentile, bottom. Like there's not enough difference between an Enhancement Shaman played poorly and an Enhancement Shaman played well. It's better than it was last expansion a little bit, since Lightning Bolt is more impactful than it used to be, it was even better on the beta when Lightning Bolt was, oh my god.
Right.
But now, not so much.
Yeah, I was bringing it up on the screen real quick, too. Oh my god, word up your keyboard.
Oh, sorry.
The 30th percentile, this is Heroic Zakun. And this is where Enhancement Shaman sits on single target, right? Like, middle of the road, and this was Purge's idea, his example, when we go to 95th percentile, Enhancement just, like, goes to 51k DPS, but just plummets. Which is the example of that there's no, like, skills ceiling, there's no cap, there's no interactive we can do to gain, where other classes sort of flip-flop. You know, like there's some movement in classes, like Arcane Mage, for example, from 30th percentile to 95th percentile. There is a skill cap gain.
Even just look at Retribution, just because
Right.
like the specs play somewhat similarly.
Right.
Like at 30th, Enhancement actually beats Ret, but at 95th, Ret is way ahead of Enhancement.
Oh yeah, it climbs the tree. It just skyrockets. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's just weird.
We don't have anything that's interesting that you can potentially game on a fight.
Yeah.
Like our cooldowns in particular is the one that I really hammer home that they're just boring. There's nothing that interacts with them. The best thing we've ever had in terms of making the cooldowns more interesting, I thought, was the two-piece from BlackRock, where actively using skills reduced their cooldowns, so we got to use them more. So it felt like it created the illusion, at least, that you had more control over them because you were actively contributing to them being up. So it gave them a layer that they didn't really make them broken or too strong. It just created the feeling that you were engaging with your cooldowns instead of just pressing them when they come up and leaving them to go, because that's what they do at the moment.
Right. Right. Move us along real quick to stats and stuff. Break down some stats, tier sets. We'll get into all that mumbo jumbo. We'll do a little bit of a pass by on tier 17. So, Enhanced Shamans, what do we care about stat-wise? And this comes into the background, like, reverse intuition that our mastery, which is Enhanced Elements, increases all fire, frost, and nature damage done by a double integer, right? So XX percentage. It's a flat spell damage increase. Nothing crazy there. Pretty straightforward, pretty simple. And our attunement stat is Lightning Strikes, where we gain 5% additional haste from all sources. But again, still pretty straightforward and simple, but they are counterintuitive to each other. Like, Purge, what's the issue with our mastery and attunement stats?
Counterintuitive. I guess that's one way to describe it. It's just the issue between haste and mastery right now is that you have enhancement specialty set up as the high target sustained AoE king.
Sure.
Right? And the best stat for that is mastery, not haste.
Right.
So there's a little bit of a, incongruity there, or however you want to describe it. Like, it's not quite matched up well. But, I mean, every Enhancement Shaman pretty much still stacks haste because I guess they don't feel that their, specialty is that valuable.
Well, it's true, yeah. If we just stack all mastery and do loads of AoE on those couple of fights we get to firing over, we're going to look awesome. But the rest of the time, because mastery is quite noticeably worse than haste in single target, it's only increasing that gap more of how our single target is performing. So we have to gauge towards propping that up as opposed to enhancing our AoE at the moment.
It's just a weird situation where, like, you brought up that fire mages had issues with their attunement, and they discussed it and brought it up, and then their attunement became 5% crit to 15% crit, so their spec would work. Whereas ours, haste lowers our GCD of our main abilities, and obviously gives us more auto attacks. Our mastery just increases all of our elemental damage we do. But there isn't, like... Obviously, our mastery is going to increase lava lash damage, but when you're increasing damage of a spell, it doesn't do any damage. Or like Flame Shock's damage, which doesn't really do any damage. It doesn't...
It's a really strange change for it, because, I mean, we did have haste scaling. It missed as well when they added it to Flurry.
the better Flurry version, yeah.
Which made haste really good. And then they changed it to this, so we lost that in the transition. And in exchange, they gave it a really engaging aspect to it, which I like, with the haste reducing the spells, so let us use it more, which also sort of compounds the spells not feeling good when you press them, because you're pressing them all the time.
Right.
But when you go into AoE, when you've got that haste, sometimes it becomes very, very hard to predict how many globals you've got spare, because you're juggling like 5 or 6 different spell cooldowns that are all cycling from the haste that you've stacked. And then you can't take mastery because of the single target problem, which we had. So, and then when you trickle down all the 3 other stats, we have negative problems with crit, because Storm Strike's providing crit, so that's devaluing it slightly. We have nothing with multi-strike, yet it's still been a really good stat for us, just because of how well it's been tuned versus how well other stats have been tuned for us. And then you've got versatility, which is just sort of there, that no one uses.
Well, yeah, like 2 classes can make use of versatility, yeah. That benefit from flat damage, so...
Nobody makes use of versatility.
No one likes that stat.
No, the only reason versatility would beat a stat for your spec is literally if your spec has some huge negative interaction with the other stat. And then no one has positive interaction with versatility. It's the same for everybody. It's the same baseline.
Sure. Yeah. Right.
It's if you compare it to what the stat could have been when we had the beta and it was readiness, where it was reducing our cooldowns.
Yeah.
That would have been appealing, but it changed to this,
right,
which is nowhere near the same sort of punch that it could have had.
So then, our stat priority for our 5 secondaries, to my knowledge, it's haste above mastery, which is both good and equal to, sort of, to multi-strike, and then versatility, then crit, correct?
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Right. Is there... People ask me a lot on the stream with like weapon enchants and stuff, this is jumping to a bottom topic, but I'll put it up here because it makes more sense, I guess. Is there like a level of haste we don't want to really exceed, or is exceeding a certain amount of haste with like weapon enchants and procs like trinkets, and is that okay? Or do we want like a base amount on our paper doll, or do we just kind of purge?
It's not really an issue that's obtainable.
Right.
Like 50% haste is the spot where haste starts to... It's basically the haste soft cap, because you no longer can reduce your GCD beyond that point.
Sure.
But the issue is that you only really hit that figure when you have, Bloodlust, Heroism, Elemental Mastery, Berserking, like those big haste cooldowns, rolling. And that's only a small portion of the fight, so pretty much everything else you can stack haste to your heart's content. And it's especially in this tier where all the haste is for whatever reason focused toward the lower item level items.
Right. Yep. Which is, you brought me right into the whole tier 18, how the eye level scaling should work. So is eye level...
In my opinion, it shouldn't work.
Well, so is
it's
eye
not
level...
something I'm for. It's not necessarily hurt me. Like the way that the gear is, we have landed in a spot where we do have options. It's just, it does feel unnecessary. It doesn't do anything to make me feel like I'm gaining more the further in I go. All it's done is devalued the ones that I get early on, because they're not going to be as good.
So then,
killing the first mythic bosses feels very underwhelming when the gear that drops there is only marginally better, if at all, better than the items that drop in the end of the heroic. And usually they're not even better because they're loaded with versatility.
Yeah, that's all the early fight drops, like they had it in BRF, already had a built-in, it's not the best item because they were loaded with the wrong stats. Whereas now you've got that plus the item level thing, so it's just compounding the bad items to being really bad.
Yeah, I mean, so are we looking at just most of the time item level is going to trump the secondary stat layouts in HFC then? Like, is there an increment that Enhanced
For the
Shaman should...
most part, although if an item is heavily weighted toward haste,
Mhm.
it can still win out over a 5 item level gap.
Like a 5 item, yeah. Fair enough. And then I was going to ask, too, because we used to put our stronger weapons in our offhands before for, like, Lava Lash abuse and spamming Lava Lash with a better offhand weapon, but is that pretty much dead at this point?
It's still the
It's not
case,
dead.
Hmm.
but if you've
There
got the
are.
Archimon trinket, then that
It's
changes.
situational.
Right.
The Archimon trinket makes it so that in a regular patchwork situation, main hand DPS is more valuable than offhand DPS. In a multi-target situation, when you both don't necessarily want to use the Archimon trinket and your Lava Lash is resetting more often, than the offhand is still more valuable.
Okay. So would you suggest, like, are there any fights that would work on? Like, I guess you could probably make the argument for, like, Iskar.
Well,
Right?
for examples like this tier, I mean on Gorfiend, unless you're glyphing to not spread it, there are a lot of things that you are spreading the Lava Lash to, and even then you would probably be using the class trinket because it's single target that matters there.
Sure.
So it's arguably usable there. It's very usable on Kilrog because there are a lot of ads that are up all the time that we're spreading to constantly. Any AoE fight, you aren't using the class trinket, so there's no reason to put it in your main hand.
Right.
It's mostly as soon as you start to see 2 to 3 ads up consistently, then it switches to your offhand. And usually when you start to see 2 to 3 ads up, the class trinket starts to go out of the window anyway.
Sure. Yep. There's a couple of fights that would make sense on, but not a ton. And it's arguably not an entirely crazy gain unless you're really gonna pay attention to it. So let's do a quick run by of tier 17 real quick before we go into tier 18. So the Wind Speaker's Regalia. You mentioned this a little bit earlier, word up about this. So our 2-piece, if you're still using it right now, of course, Storm Strike reduces the cooldown of Feral Spirits by 5 seconds per use. And then, of course, Feral Spirits, when they cast on the 4-piece, gain Wind Fury while active, their own version of Wind Fury. And the Shaman, of course, will turn into a wolf or a raptor if glyphed, and they gain a 25% movement speed buff for the duration. So I guess the biggest question about this was that if you're transitioning from 17 to 18, do you run 2-piece, 2-piece? Do you just wait for the 4-piece to go from full tier 17 to full tier 18? Like, what did you find out about?
You swap right away.
You swap right away?
Yeah, 2-piece is for starters. It's not purely single target, so you can use it on all of the fights that show up in Hellfire that's got multiple targets. And
even if it wasn't,
Even if
it does just as much single target as the old 4-piece.
Okay.
And there's nothing that really
it's
gains the cooldown aspect. That gains from the cooldown aspect in
Yeah,
Hellfire.
it's just a straight up stronger bonus.
Okay, so 2-piece works fine.
And then you drop, obviously, the tier 17 2-piece as soon as you can, just because it does literally nothing.
Sure, that's fair. So there's really no reason to keep it around. I know during, like, Split Heroics, I would keep my Mythic tier 17 4-set for, like, a couple of, like, single-target tunnel bosses, because I didn't only had 2-piece. But that was, like, because I had a normal chest and, like, a Heroic Helm, so I was like, yeah, I'll just keep this on, but that's what I was expecting.
That's kind of the issue with the tier 17 2-piece, though, is that it used to be weak, but serviceable. And then, but then just as the expansions went on, we've kept getting buffs to things, not Feral Spirit. So Feral Spirit is just becoming a smaller and a smaller and a smaller chunk of our damage. So it's like 1% damage bonus at this point now. It's like, just drop it as soon as you get the chance.
Fair enough. We still have the same off-piece. This is a multi-tier thing. So we're still using an off-piece legs for tier 17 or tier 18. So
the legs and chest generally are the two ones that I'd go with, which would be Warlords Haste Multi-Strike Chest or the Tyrant Mastery Multi-Strike. It's dependent on whether you want to focus on the single target aspects or the priority target, which is the chest, definitely, or you want to do the AoE oriented, then it's definitely the legs.
Okay. And that also comes down to, there's an eye level disparage there, because you can get the legs earlier and the chest later. So
yeah,
I know I'll be switching to tier legs eventually and picking up the Vilhari Heroic chest, but we have to, A has to drop. So Yep. Understandable. So then, tier 18 then. The Embrace of the Living Mountain. Whenever you gain a Maelstrom weapon charge for the 2-piece, you electrocute all nearby enemies within 10 yards for 1,800 to 2,400 damage, depending on where your gear is at, depending on where you're raid buffed. A little more, a little less. And then your 4-piece is your Maelstrom weapon charges stacked to 10. Please make this baseline on the next expansion, Blizzard. Thank you. Sincerely, all Enhancement Shamans. Each charge grants an additional 12% damage, up to a maximum of plus 60% damage. And then coupled with the Maelstrom weapon perk we got leveling up in Draenor, that makes it 110% full bonus damage with the perk. The tooltip in the game right now is wrong, because tooltips lie to you. It is actually 12% per stack, up to 5 maximum. So this went through some weird, tumultuous iterations. It was like really good, and then it was like nerfed to the ground, and then it was like, it's fine now. How's our Embrace of the Living Mountain working out, Purge?
It's pretty much finally at a good spot. There's no hidden bugs that make the 4-piece secretly more than twice as good as it's supposed to be.
Right.
Which kept getting the actual bonus nerf instead of the bug fix, but that's finally straightened out.
Right.
Yep. The set bonus is a lot better than last tier, just because last tier we effectively only had one bonus since the 2-piece was so weak.
That's true.
And yeah, I do agree that I think, going forward in the future expansion, I do like 10-stack Maelstrom. That I think that adds to the spec and what it can do. In terms of gameplay-wise, pooling or dumping or whatever you want to call it. And for the tier 17 4-piece, I like that conceptual. Just when you use the feral spirits, they also, turn you into a wolf and empower you and all that stuff. I think if they do go the route of, say, taking Fire Elemental out of Enhancement's kit and making feral spirit a little bit stronger, I'd like to see it done somewhat in that direction rather than just buffing their auto attacks, to the end of time.
Right.
Yeah, I like asset bonuses this tier. I mean, the 2-piece is it's not super special, but it's at least interesting. Until, of course, they took out the visual. Yeah, they took out the visual, which was nice, but it's just a good bonus that I like to make use of. The 4-piece I really like. It just seems like it's come at the wrong time because it's focusing on sustained single target. Has no interaction with their AoE, and really because Chain Lightning's barely there, and
I wouldn't necessarily say it came at the wrong time, just because we are lacking sustained single target, and the bonus that does that is incredibly valuable. It's just that it obviously, even with it, it's not enough to bring us up to par in that department.
Correct. Yeah.
But the 10 Maelstrom charge is just absolutely the best. It's just like the 4-piece from Siege was amazing that I really wanted to see that go live. That's a fantastic idea, especially with Echo, which is the best talent that I think they've done for us in God knows how long.
Yeah.
So, though that part of it, thumbs up. In fact, the bonuses in general, thumbs up. It's just our tuning that's holding it back. The bonuses were on point.
Right. So the big thing I always figure out too is there a huge benefit for when you take Unleashed Fury, which I think we'll get to later about. That's like the only talent you take ever in that tier. The term I've coined is Railgun Enhancement, where you want to throw off as many lightning bolts in that UF window as possible. Is that the way we should be working for it, or is it still just kind of fine, just throw off lightning bolts just whenever, and if they line up within the UF window, it's fine too?
Right now, in the sim at least, it is slightly optimal to pool your charges for when the Unleashed Fury buff is up.
Okay.
You're not going to notice a huge difference either way, though.
Right. It is fun to do 3 to 5 in a row, though. So, it's pretty fun.
I tend to make sure that I don't waste any charges, because that is a big no-no on using Maelstrom, and then try and have 7 to 8 charges as I'm going into an Unleashed Fury cast, and dump as much as possible before the buff ends.
Sure.
Optimally not hard casting, anywhere near as much as we used to.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's the next question I was going to ask. Is that we never want to cast below 5 now, right? Optimally.
You can. It's just it's not nearly as much of a gain as it used to be. Like now in the sim, it only sometimes casts at like 3 to 5-ish. Like basically the conditions have to be that Unleash Fury is up, Ascendance is not up, and you have all your other abilities are on cooldown and you have like 3 stacks, then you can chuck that hard cast out.
Sure.
But otherwise, again, small differences between whether you do it or not. You're not really going to notice it really at the end of the day.
Right. Yeah, the biggest thing is to never cap. And if anyone's ever watched the stream that you've seen being at 8 and a UF, like I'll unleash, and then I'll cast, I'll Storm Strike, and I'll cap again, and I will Lightning Bolt, and then Storm Strike again with Echo, and then go back to like 5 or 6. The RNG, obviously on the Archimon Trinket, is what makes that Railgun enhancement like thing, but you gotta make sure you don't sit at like 8 or 9, and then use a special, and then overcap. You just wasted potential DPS. So that's always, that gameplay is still very much there. You need to be aware of that. So most definitely. But I mean, it's not bad. It feels pretty good. I mean, the Lightning Bolt crits now, or even just hits now with the bonus, feel meaningful, right? Like it's the first time I've ever seen Lightning Bolt actually show up as like ooh, it's a button that actually means something. It's and mostly because of the Archimon Trinket now, which we'll get into, is the core of Primal Elements, which also brings back a little guy we just knew as Wind Fury that used to be our best friend. But Archimon Trinket, or the core of Primal Elements, are Wind Fury attacks, deal an additional 461.13% additional damage at the normal version. And it also has a damage that increases the chance to generate Maelstrom weapon stacks when Wind Fury will proc. Again, the normal version is a 41.17% chance when Wind Fury procs to generate Maelstrom weapon charges. So that goes all the way up to heroic.
It's a chance on each Wind Fury attack,
Wind Fury,
not just when it procs.
Correct.
So
yeah.
3 times per proc.
3 times per proc, yeah. That's why you can get up to like 5 on one Storm Strike. So
you can get a lot more than that.
Right, of course. But it's ridiculous. So yeah,
well,
normal.
Just from both Storm Strikes could generate 1.
Yeah.
All 3 Wind Furies could generate 1 just from the normal Maelstrom chance, and then all 3 Wind Furies can generate another 1 from the extra roll that they get on the trinket. So just that, even assuming you're not auto attacking for whatever reason.
Yeah. 8 on one button press. Yeah. Normal is 460% Wind Fury damage, which is like a lot. You might think it's like a huge amount, but it actually makes Wind Fury like, kind of respectable now.
It makes it show up.
Makes it show up.
Which it hasn't been for a long time.
Yeah. So
it's not the most interesting trinket, but it's good. I mean, I have nothing bad to say about it.
Sure. I like the design space of those sorts of things. I don't necessarily know if I like the idea of it living in the trinket slot. Like, if anything, I would almost say, hey, Blizzard, bring back, the totem spot, or, whatever equivalent for other classes like Librams or whatever.
And stuff like that, yeah.
And even for classes that didn't necessarily have one, like you could give warriors like a war banner or something or whatever. Like, I think that slot could be something that could be cool, every tier, just, a little bit different. Maybe not even necessarily something that grows in power level, but gives you something that can, is good in different situations almost, I don't know. Yeah. But Wind Fury, I think I disagree with a lot of people in the sense that I don't necessarily think it needs to be the heavy hitter it used to, because it detracts from... everything can't be the heavy hitter. Like, you have to pick something that you want to be the heavy hitter.
Sure.
Otherwise all our... Because every expansion, like, during the beta, we had Lightning Bolt as our heavy hitter.
Right.
I didn't have any complaints about that. I mean, there were some weird interactions based on how it was tuned. Like, I think more of it should have been in the Maelstrom bonus and less in the base Lightning Bolt spell, so that you weren't necessarily encouraged to hardcast even if you didn't have any Maelstrom charges.
Right.
But, that direction was good. We actually had a spell that hit for something meaningful, And just over the course of the beta and live, that's been eroded to the point where like all of our buttons kind of hit for the same again. And that's we're kind of at that point again where it's like, okay, Lava Lashes average, Storm Strike's average, Lightning Bolt's average, Frost Shock is a third of average. So it's like at the end of a fight, how you spent your GCDs is less relevant. Like, okay, you cast more Storm Strikes, you cast more Lava Lashes, you got more Lightning Bolts off. You all did the same damage because that was all fine, you know?
Yep.
So it's like, that gets back to the other point where it's like the difference between an Enhancement Shaman played poorly, what even is poor in the current setup, if you can do it so many different ways and end up at approximately the same endpoint.
Yeah.
You know?
Mm-hmm. Yep. But, oh yes, in chat room, yeah, the tooltips on both the set bonus and the trinket are incorrect on live. They have not been received the current buffs because the Archimon trinket was buffed by 40%.
I guess the thing that I forgot to mention, though, was that I do agree that Flame Tongue probably doesn't need to exist.
Yep.
And maybe you could take damage from that and make Wind Fury a little bit stronger. But
yep.
Beyond that, I don't think we need Wind Fury to be driving the big numbers. I think we want.
We don't want.
I think we want a little bit more differentiation between our abilities,
right.
And especially we want more interaction between our abilities and our cooldowns.
Yeah. So trinket preference and combos in tier 18, is it more or less just Soul Capacitor and Archimon trinket, and then if you're doing heavy AoE fights, you can put on Blade Storm?
Very difficult to judge.
There's
this
no
tier.
single set really that you want. You want pretty much every trinket except for Fellspring Coil, because Fellspring Coil is just a pile of crap.
Yes.
The big thing with some of these trinkets are that there are fights. I've encountered some in Mythic that they don't work on. You can't use them, despite how much damage they'll do. The way that they do it, because it's not a buff on us, it's more of a fluid extra effect. You can't use them. So you can't use Soul Capacitor on Gorfine Mythic, for example, because you kill the ghosts accidentally, which is a big problem. You can't use Blade Master for the same reason. You can't use Soul Cap on Kilrog if you're going downstairs, because you'll get a proc, and then you can't kill the ads in time, and then you get overwhelmed. Same goes for Blade Master as well. There are times where you know that the boss is going to move, so you're not going to be able to get use out of it. It lasts so long, so on Cormrock hands, it's going to be effectively useless, because for 10 to 15 seconds of that, their hands are dead because they got blown up by everyone. So because they're unique trinkets, you have to think a lot more about the fight itself as to whether or not it's appropriate to use than other trinkets have been for a long time, which is really interesting. It's just very difficult to recommend a specific combination.
Right. That sort of goes a long way with almost every DPS in the game right now, though, too. So
no, I would say Blizzard did a good job on the agility trinkets in that front, because there is like a lot of give and take deciding.
I guess the strength trinkets aren't.
Even like not just like in strength trinkets, it's like
you can pick two and forget about it.
Empty Drinking Horn, if you're a warrior or a ret paladin, doesn't matter what fight it is, you're going to be using Empty Drinking Horn just because it's still overtuned for you guys. Okay, cool. Like that's great for me. If I have a ret paladin, I get that trinket. Cool, I have an overpowered trinket. But like, decision making wise, there's no gameplay there. It's just, okay, I got the overpowered trinket. That is one of my trinket slots forever. No thought involved there. Boom.
Yeah. Chat's, of course, bringing up now the cancel aura stuff for the Soul Capacitor, which is sort of a thing there.
The problem is that when you have to cancel aura, it depends how often you have to. On some fights, like on Soccer, you'll have to cancel aura if the boss is immune, because you're going to split the damage. So you could use it, but you are wasting those procs because you have to immediately cancel them, which is therefore a reason that it's going to fall behind other trinkets, because there's procs that are going to just disappear because they do nothing.
Yep. there's a weird interaction. And if chat room was asking earlier about the legendary ring interactions and all that kind of garbage, we're not going to go over the legendary ring on the show right now. There's not enough empirical evidence to really break down how much it's going to break the game. But be sure, chat room, that the legendary ring is pretty much going to break the game. There are way too many weird interactions with different trinkets, classes, abilities, spells, and different specs in the game that are... I'm just gonna sigh.
Yeah, just a point in chat. It's less dumb for the Felburn trinket is less dumb for warriors than it is for rep paladins. But like I think they kind of over nerfed the Fel Cleave trinket to the point where on a lot of AOE fights the Felburn trinket is still better.
Right.
It's just,
Right. Fair enough. So yeah. So for trinkets for enhancement, it's sort of like you want all four, except the stupid one from Iron Reaver, and then you just kind of have to judge what you need based on the encounter. Weapon enchants, though, we're still going with Warsong Haste main hand and Bleeding Hollow Mastery offhand as the two better choices.
That's pretty much the hedging your bets combination that most people do. It's like an okay setup for any fight. If it's single target, you have your haste enchant. If it's AoE, you have your mastery enchant.
Right. I was running double haste for a long time for Mythic Black Hand because I was doing this tunneling one boss. But obviously it's haste mastery now, so... Yep. Anything else to touch on real quick before I take a little break? And then we come back with talent stuff? Good?
Talent stuff sounds good.
Alrighty then. Well, chat room, take a little moment to take of your time and tell you about some awesome communities and websites behind the scenes or other peoples on the internet you may not have heard about. Of course, if you should have by now heard about this website called Summonstone, I hope so. Not every class and or spec has a guide on Summonstone, but many of them do, and they're up here at the top right there. Link for Summonstone is down below, of course. You can go check out the really awesomely well put together, chunky, macro, laden, weak aura posting guides on Summonstone.com. Go check out those down below. If you have your class guide up there, I'm sure you can probably learn a thing or two or seven, or pass it along to your guildies that might be learning a new class or a spec. Additionally, if you're totally in the option for watching something goofy on the internet, and something awesome in the Machinima world, you can go check out Nixium. Nixium Machinima, he puts together WoW videos and other things. As he said, he won a third place prize at last year's BlizzCon. And I was in a recent video, How to Mages. Some of you may have watched that. But he does spoofs on the ending cinematics in the game. He's done a couple of them right now. He has a long series of Machinima dating back for quite some time. So if you want to dabble in the... What the heck is that? If you want to dabble in some World of Warcraft Machinima, you can go check out Nixium. You can find him on the YouTubes at just Nixium Machinima. Additionally, talking about YouTube, all of our episodes are also archived to our YouTube page. Additionally, all of the kill videos from my POV, after shows with all of our guests, additional fun side content, a live patch Q&A that I did a live feedback of, and then I talked to chat room about for like 2 hours after, is all up on our YouTube. Links down below, as well as FinalBossTV is found on Stitcher and iTunes. If you want to listen to the audio-only versions, feel free to jump on that. As we pass by the Method World First interview for BlackRock Foundry, yes, we will be talking to Method in the future for their World First Mythic Archimond. Yes, there will be another design that will be posted up on our Designed by Humans page, which is totally up for purchase, which goes to support the show and support the Mythic World First race. That'll come soon. Details, of course, on that will be eventual. We have to wait for a couple other guilds to really defeat the encounter so we can talk about the encounter on the show. Earliest we could have it is like a Saturday special on the 25th, but it might be delayed more than that. Depends on, what they need, and guests and a promotional graphic will come out. All about that in the future, and MMO Champion will have it as well, so you'll know when it's coming. But we'll talk to them just like we did with BRF, just like we did with Paragon before them for Heimal. And, yeah. Let's talk about talents now, gentlemen. Are you ready for this? You ready for this?
I am ready.
Yes.
Okay. Let me close this and that and this real quick, and then bring over the talent calculator. We'll go over this. We've got about 20 minutes or so left to get all this stuff out. But level 100 talents, we'll dive right in.
Oh, starting at that end of the tree. Okay.
Yeah, Elemental Fusion, Storm Elemental Totem, and Molten Vomit. I mean, Liquid Magma. Um, just to preface this as well, Elemental Fusion was actually buffed in a way that no one ever said. It wasn't actually communicated to us that you could actually spread the unleashed fire as well as double Elemental Fusion flame shocks now.
Kind of, sort of.
Kind of. What do you mean, kind of, sort of? Like not communicated,
Well,
or
well, I mean, it was just a weird kind of situation in that, for as long as the system had been around, really, Lava Lash was able to spread empowered flame shocks with unleash elements and all that.
well, unleash elements, yes, but not
but
not
then
fusion.
then the beta came along and that went away. So for specifically the 6.0 patch, you only spread unbuffed flame shocks, both elemental fusion and unleash elements.
Sure.
Neither buff spread. And then in 6.1, it's back again. So from 6.1 onward, Lava Lash behaves as it always had
Right.
in everything other than specifically patch 6.0.
Right.
So that means elemental fusion is a usable talent now.
No, absolutely it is. Which Purge has dabbled in this quite a bit. Our other pretty good front-running talent for use on almost everything is Liquid Magma. I'm pretty sure we're all sort of in the same boat that, like, Storm Elemental is, like, just...
Well, I've used Storm Elemental quite a bit this tier after the 4-piece because it's no longer got that Primal Elementalist thing that's been being nasty with it, where it's stopping it from doing damage.
Sure.
And it's been usable on single target fights. It's never really wowed me, but it's like there have been instances where it's done enough that I think it's worth taking over Elemental Fusion and Liquid Magma, but those are really rare instances. So on Gorefiend, you can cycle 1 minute elementals for every feast, which is brilliant. So you could take it there, and you can sort of take it on Fell Lord. So you can open with Fire Elemental, and in the Lust at the end, you can Storm Elemental.
Storm Elemental at the end, yeah.
But compared to how much damage you gain from the other two, it's so marginal, and it's got nothing in AoE at all that it doesn't have. It doesn't really have a place at the moment, and I'm not a fan of the 5-minute cooldown thing anyway, so it's very difficult to sell it.
So then what would you guys suggest then? I mean, you can set it and forget it with Liquid Magma. You can kind of set it and forget it with Elemental Fusion.
What wasn't mentioned was that it also interacts strangely with Primal Elementalist.
Well, yeah, that's what
right now.
Werdup brought that up, but we don't have to use PE anymore, so we don't have the weird interaction. Yeah.
Well, I know, but I mean, still, if somebody... I mean, I don't think this is widely known, but like if you use Primal Storm Elemental, and I guess this is only an issue if it has its little movement speed aura up, then it will just use like 40 to 60% less wind gusts. Okay.
Yeah, it tries to keep the aura underneath something. I've not found out yet whether it's us or it's other people, but it repositions mid-cast so it won't finish them, and it'll spend its time moving around, which is a big nerf to the amount of damage it does.
Correct. So the baseline there for all of our enhancement and even elemental brothers out there is that Primal Elementalist Storm Elemental is bad. It's a DPS loss. Just normal Storm Elemental is fine, but PE Storm Elemental is bad. Unless you're taking PE Storm Elemental for like PvP, like for the knock-up. Like otherwise than that, in raiding, you're not going to run it because it actually nerfs its damage. So it's sad because it looks cooler, I guess, but that vanilla graphic on the regular Storm Elemental is pretty tops. But yeah, that's the weird interaction. But
I think the thing that bugs me the most about the Storm Elemental is the little icon. Like the Fire Elemental icon is a Fire Elemental, the Earth Elemental icon is an Earth Elemental.
Storm Elemental is a totem.
And the Storm Elemental icon is a totem. Okay.
Yeah, I know. Oh, goodness. But, so this also brings us, we also talked about level 90 talents and Primal Elementalist then, which is basically right out. We're sort of just Unleash Fury once you get the 4 set forever. Set it and forget it.
Effectively, yeah. Primal Elementalist just is not worth it once you've got Unleash Fury, because Unleash Fury is interacting with our bonuses.
Yep. That's... The multi-strike chance is kind of But the 30% additional lightning
Yeah.
bolt damage does add with the set bonus and our perk. So
It's not as fun as it was with
Right.
the static shock mechanic, so that it felt like it was interacting with Wind Fury somehow.
sure.
But it's at least it's more engaging. I mean, Elemental Blast is one that I really like.
Oh, I like
but
it
it's-
too. Yeah, but it's
As Purge explained to me yesterday, there is something very interesting that's holding its damage back.
yeah.
and-
Purge. What's wrong with Elemental Blast? Purge. What's
There's a hidden minus 50% damage done modifier on it for Enhancement Shamans.
Yay!
Which basically makes
Which
it hit
means
for
it
about
hits.
lightning bolt damage.
Yeah,
which
it can
is
benefit
really-
from Unleash Flame, which isn't always a good thing, which means it's a bad AoE talent because it's competing for Unleash Flame buffs with Flame Shock and Fire Nova.
Right.
So it's like,
I mean, the talent has a position where it could instead replace lightning bolt for us completely as the
Oh,
talent,
that would be great if it did that. That would
which
actually probably be pretty
stops
competitive.
the clunky having to hard cast it 'cause it's just come off cooldown, or it could just become baseline full stop and replace lightning bolt for us, so we don't clash with elemental, so they don't have these awkward moments where they don't want to buff
Yep.
something because it might buff the other one, but that would require someone to replace it on the talent tree, and that's a much more sort of
Well-
in-depth discussion about that.
Well, sure. I mean, we've already talked about plenty enough that another issue inherent with Shaman in general is that our trees are basically exactly the same between our DPS specs. Nothing changes, which doesn't happen for like a lot of other DPS
there are enough
classes, so-
separate tuning knobs. I mean, even for shared abilities, like Elemental has their Shamanism to tune their Lightning Bolt. We have
Sure,
our
yep,
improved Maelstrom weapon to tune our Lightning Bolt specifically.
Yep.
Like Lightning Bolt doesn't hit for nearly the same between the two specs.
Right.
Elemental has Lava Burst and Lightning Shield. You know, we have Lava Lash and I guess Frost Shock. But for whatever reason, that was, I don't know, nothing really became of that separation. Like it's like,
Right.
okay, they separated. They gave Elemental Earth Shock. They gave us Frost Shock. So there was a little extra tuning knob there. But then, like, I guess Part B never happened. Like that happened, but there was, at the end of the day, there was no point to it because nothing ever became of it. So it's like,
Right.
okay.
Right. Yeah. It's a weird spot. So yeah, basically you're taking Unleash Fury with the 4 set forever. You can run Elemental Fusion or Liquid Magma, or you can run Storm Elemental by itself on like pure single target encounters. But the argumented point too is that Elemental Fusion is actually like really good on like a Warlords Zakuun fight too. It just depends on what you want to play with, like a 5-minute set it and forget it, or an interactive Elemental Fusion, you know, bouncing your Flame Shock and hitting with pretty good Frost Shocks. But now our other talent tier, level 60, is Elemental Mastery.
Oh, you're gonna skip over 75?
Yeah, I'm gonna skip over 75. Purge. Ancestral Swiftness and Echo of the Elements. This suffers from a similar issue where we used to use EMPE with Fire Elemental a lot back in Mists, and AS has sort of always just been awful. But now they just buffed us.
It's been good. It's serviceable. It's just
I would
it's-
disagree with the characterization there.
Okay.
it's just
It
in
used
every
to be-
way
Yeah,
inferior to Echo.
now it didn't used
Yeah.
to be the case.
Not
Sure.
then. No, yeah.
Before, AS was balanced to be the best sustained single target talent.
Sure.
Elemental Mastery was obviously burst. Echo was not quite as good sustained single target, but it had its AoE thing going on.
Yep.
Cool. Then, for whatever reason, they redesigned Echo, which was one of the best things they've done for the talent tree,
Sure.
and that talent specifically. Echo is amazing now. It's great. It feels good to play. Good. And then, for whatever reason, they kind of hidden nerfed AS. Well, it wasn't really hidden. I think they mentioned it in one of the
It was
hotfix
a
notes or
hotfix
patch
note.
notes or something. But they made it so that Lightning Bolt doesn't benefit from improved Maelstrom weapon. Okay.
I don't understand.
Now it's a dead talent.
Yeah. 'Cause what you would do with AS before they nerfed that is you could actually AS Lightning Bolt when you had 5 stacks and give that one a 5-stack benefit, and then also throw off your 5-stack afterwards. So you get 2 lightning bolts in that same period, which was like on a 1.5 minute cooldown is like
Yeah, it wasn't a huge DPS change, but it was enough to make it, slightly more sustained damage than the other
Sure.
talents.
Absolutely.
But now it's like the same sustained damage, but it requires you have 100% time on target, which the other two don't require, so never use AS.
yeah.
And then even at the end of the day, it's like, okay, so with that interaction gone, there's no real gameplay to AS, right? You just fire it on cooldown, and then the other part of it is just passively there, like 5% haste, 5% attack speed.
Sure.
I think it's probably one of the worst design talents like in the entire game now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just there's nothing interesting about it. With the other two, Elemental Mastery has been there as a cooldown stacking option. Not a huge fan of it after they seemingly intentionally desynced it, which was what made it so good, because it synced up with everything.
Yep.
Other than Feral Spirit, which at the time in Mists was a non-issue because Feral Spirits wasn't doing any damage really. And then they desynced it. It's still really good when we have it stacked. It's just that it's this extra layer that we need to stop and think, is the boss going to die? Can I save it? Can I use it now?
Yeah.
Do I just use it with no cooldowns because it's going to come up for the end? And that's not really engaging with how uninteresting our cooldowns are already.
Yeah.
So EMs...
That's the other thing is like Elemental Mastery. Like, oh my god, I bet this does something amazing, right?
I know.
It's 30% haste cooldown.
It's the troll racial.
Totally generic and forgettable.
Yeah. It's the troll racial.
Like the talent could have so much flavor just based on the name and what it does, but it's like 30% haste.
Yeah. Hey, Bink brings up in chat, Elemental Mastery will be really awesome with Legendary Ring, right?
It's slightly better.
Yeah, but the thing is, Echo is just so good, full stop. It is the most fun, it's the most interesting talent, and having pooled charges for when you've got the ring up, or even for soul capacitor procs, it means you can fill the buff that it's up with more damaging spells as opposed to filler spells. So we're going to be doing more Storm Strikes and Lava Lashes because we've got 2 going into it during the procs than we would with Elemental Mastery, because Elemental Mastery is not up all the time. We can't hold it for procs.
Yeah. Yeah, it's just that. It's just I guess. That talent, the only fight that I ever have taken EM on in this entire expansion, I want to say, was, I think, Kilrog. I may have taken it for Korag, the Ogre with the mana shield, right? Because I wasn't really worrying about AoEing that, because that was just scumbagging. I was worried about tunneling as much damage into the boss when he was doing the repowering his shield, so you can do full damage to him, right? And that was like the only time I could think of it. And obviously you can, if you're going into the brain phase and like heroic Kilrog, you can't do this in Mythic, is you can do EM, PE, Liquid Magma, and totally burst for mad damage.
Well, on Mythic Kilrog, you don't have that. You can't take Elemental Mastery because you aren't going to do downstairs on your own unless you're sending multiple AoEs, which isn't optimal either for our AoE because obviously the scaling up and down that we've had. But Echo, as some in the chat have said, Echo is so fundamentally good for the way our class works because of the increased cooldown reduction that we're gaining with the gear. It is so strong that it almost feels like it has to be baseline to stop the bloat of the class. It fixes.
It's one of those things where it's like throughput wise, it's about on par with the other talents, but feel wise, it's the only talent on the tree which is like a game changer, and in a game changer in a positive way that makes the spec feel so much better.
Right.
It's so much. It's a versatile talent. Is what's so much better than the others because it can have implications for AoE, both sustained and burst, and implications for single target and for single target burst and for procs. It's just everything about the talent is better than both of the talents in nearly every situation.
Yep.
Unless you're cooldown stacking, which we don't anymore. So
there's
never any reason to not talent Echo at this point, especially with the 4-piece.
Especially after the Band-Aid fixes where they keep buffing Lava Lash and Storm Strike as well. So it's a compound effect of the Hellfire gear that's made it so good, because it was good in Blackrock, but it wasn't quite. It hadn't grown into itself at the time. Right. Yeah.
I mean, compared to the original launch Echo. That was really good as well, but it was
A little more
awkward to
RNG
play
oriented,
with.
obviously, but yeah, it's better
I
now
mean,
than it used to be. Yeah, yeah,
it would be easy to just make it baseline for enhancement and turn Echo for us into the old one, which was the duplicate casts when we did things. But whether they choose to do that, I don't know. But I think
yeah.
charge systems is a really good way to fix us if they want to keep us as static as we are for cooldowns, for attacks, for everything. It was a solution that was perfect. It fixed being able to hold spells instead of having to mash them.
It definitely needs to be some. I think the overall theme we've dealt with is that, like the upgrades to Warlords and the ability pruning system and the talent management has been. After talking to Elemental as well, and with enhancement now, it's pretty lackluster for options. Like there are bad interactions. Otherwise, they're like just big stupid cooldowns, or they just don't have any gameplay that really makes it worth it. And if anyone has gameplay like Echo, it just becomes the better one. Period.
Mm.
So, Purge wants to bring up bad talent tiers real quick. I mean, like
75 and 45, I would say, are
And,
the
Every
two
tier?
huge ones.
yeah. I mean, our 15s
Well,
are
there
fine.
there are
but-
bad talents on each tier, but I
Correct.
would specifically call the 45 and the 75 talent tiers
Particularly egregious.
egregiously bad. Like no redeeming qualities going on here.
I mean, the totemic projection obviously has its uses for like Elemental and Resto, but it has no use for us really outside of like PvP. I would still think that I still argue that totemic persistence should affect fire totems, but
Mhm. Totemic persistence shouldn't exist.
well, yeah,
I mean, what it was at least had something. You could game your fire
Yeah.
elementals by destroying it, so you get it more often. But it wasn't a good thing to do, but it was at least something. I've never
Yeah.
ever talented totemic persistence.
I have
There's
never either.
nothing about it.
I'm called to elements all day, every day.
I mean, Call of the Elements has had moments. I mean, Grand Empress, we needed it for the double tremor. But
Double
we don't
tremor,
have
yeah. I
any
mean,
reason to tremor?
Yeah,
Right.
the thing about Call of the Elements is in thinking in like next expansion thoughts, if they made totems, worth something, Call of the Elements could be a perfectly fine talent. It could still exist in that spot on the talent tree if
Sure.
totems were meaningful. Resetting their cooldowns could also be meaningful, although that's not guaranteed because sometimes, like at least the way with a lot of the current setup totems are set up, like Tremor or Grounding Totem or whatever, you press it to counter the one specific thing, and then pretty much you countered it, move on. So like resetting the cooldown isn't necessarily as valuable because there's no like persisting effect really that you get from increasing the uptime.
right.
A lot of the times at least. But still, depending on how totems are redesigned, that talent could become good someday. Totemic persistence can never be good.
Right.
Not with the way things are currently set up. Because I mean, unless they just flooded us with unless they like doubled the number of totems we have, they're like this totem school. The totem school restrictions, they might as well not even exist anymore because like each school has like for water school, we only have one water totem.
Water totem, yeah.
As elemental and enhancement. Okay, so why
Yeah.
does the water school exist?
Exactly. They should just they literally should unlink that that restriction. It just feels archaic and old
It's like
and gross.
the schools could be meaningful if they consolidated them, like 4 schools. Too many for the number of totems that we can realistically carry around. But maybe 2 schools could be workable. Maybe 3.
Offensive and defensive? I don't know. I don't even know if that even makes sense either. It should be just totems
Mhm.
have totems.
But so
It's-
still, either way, totemic persistence pretty much. I don't see that surviving in any meaningful way. At
Right.
least
I mean-
no way that the players will be satisfied with.
Right.
Projection needs to be something that's baseline in general. It's not something. It's not a big meaningful change for anyone really. It's just something that should always exist for people because it just it comes again down to it just makes everything feel a bit more consistent, a bit better. I mean, Call of the Elements I used once this tier already with Capacitor and Killrod because I'm alone. So suddenly all those small utility totems are quite good because no one else at all can provide them. So getting 2 is good. But generally, Call of the Elements hasn't got that option because unless they make every boss have a phase where you're alone and you need to use all your totems, it's never going to be good unless they add good totems.
Yeah.
Projection, like you said, I mean, it's one of those things where Elemental and Resto, they can use it, especially, but it's not because it feels like a good talent. It's just like,
They have to.
okay, here are these totems that you have that don't function from where you exist in the raid.
Yeah.
So here's a talent that lets you put the totems where they need to be so that they function.
Exactly. No, projection should be baseline. I totally agree.
Mm.
The ability to move our totems that have very minimal impact in the first place should just be baseline, because like having to take a talent to then make them somewhat less not worth it is helpful. So, after that,
the other tiers.
Well, earlier in the show, yeah, we went through level 75. It should be completely reworked for elemental and enhancement and become a more utility-oriented tier, because the healing options are pretty much
Well, it doesn't
useless.
necessarily have to be. It's just that they need to take less of a hard line on the healing thing if they want it to stay as a healing tier for us. Because
Sure.
it's not like we've seen it in the past how good our healing could be, and even now, even more so. It's more of a choice to use Maelstrom weapon.
It's a huge pendulum swing between Raw Den, where our healing was clearly too good, and now where our healing, especially with those talents, literally just doesn't exist. But for whatever reason, those talents are still there, cluttering up our spellbook.
Yeah.
So it's like if you want us to have healing talents, they should probably do something.
Yep.
Maybe less than they did on Raw Den, but certainly several times more than what they do now.
Yep.
I mean, Ancestral Guidance is just fundamentally worse than every other DPS class that has it. And
VE and Nature's Vigil.
I mean, if they could make that tier allow Healing Rain to be healing with Maelstrom again, and it wouldn't break anything, because health pools versus healing done by it, even if it doubled, tripled, it wouldn't be that good, especially as a DPS. But instead, we've got two talents in there that are effectively duds, and we've got guidance that is just taken, but you virtually never use anyway, and isn't going to change anything.
Correct.
So allowing us to heal wouldn't be that bad. It was good in Siege with Chain Heal when they took this Healing Rain away, and it was fun. It was engaging to be paying attention to your raid's health and help with off healing.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's a punishment to use the Maelstrom, because that's our primary damage finishers. So it makes it even more engaging then, because you have to weigh up, can I afford to? But we don't at the moment, because there's just nothing to gain from using Healing Surge on people, really.
Yep, I think the outside of Resto, the Shaman DPS side of the things are in a weird spot right now. I would love to go over some totem stuff, some glyph stuff, but there's not a whole lot to go over what we can do. We'll do it in the after show. We'll do glyphs in the after show. Real quick, little wrap up soapbox. You want to leave the audience with? Word up. What you got for them?
Whoa, I don't know. I mean,
we talked about a lot of stuff. I just didn't know if you had anything that was like prepared for this. Anything?
Well, I've got all the resources around if anyone needs to check out more. So I've got the spreadsheet that can be linked in the chat, and I've got the boss tips as well that's floating around now.
Plug your massive post.
And I've got an enormous feedback post that's showing up now. That's on MMO Champ and the official forums.
Yep.
I mean, basically, it comes down to they need to retune our damage if they don't want to give us utility. But there's a lot more there if anyone wants to get on top of that.
Oh, it's a great post. Absolutely, we'll definitely
the
get that.
Shamanifesto, as my friends have decided to coin it.
It'll definitely be brought up. It'll be put in the YouTube description box as well. Purge, anything?
Happy Fire Nova.
Oh my god. Yeah? Is that what you want? That's it?
That's it for enhancement, yeah.
Alright. I will leave with some cosmetic things. Can we get a minor glyph so we can glyph Wind Strike to look like Storm Blast, please? Or just make it Storm Blast animation, but just make it do what it does now. Wind Strike looks terrible.
Yeah, I would talk about that a little bit too, just that Storm Strike still has the lightning graphic, and it hits for physical damage. No one complains about it. Why, even if you wanted to make Storm Blast hit for physical, why did it have to turn into this pushy, windy, weak-looking animation? I don't know. I don't buy it.
Yep. My other one was that I would like a glyph that makes, if we're not going to get back Earthshock as enhancement, to make Frostshock look like Earthshock. because I miss Earthshock. I mean, it could still have the slow. Who cares? Just the graphical thing. But I'm gonna hit the button because we're definitely at time. Definitely at time. Thank you all for joining us today for episode number 88 of Final Boss TV for Enhancement Shamans. We still have one more episode left to do for the regular junket before we move on to the catch-up episodes, which will be basically bringing it back up to speed to tier 18. So again, around the table, we had this gentleman on the show for the first time. There's Werdup. Thank you for being on the show, sir. You can go follow him on Twitter at Von_Werdup. You can also find his posts on the MMO Champion forums, the EU forums, the US forums, also linkable in the chat for his giant Google documents of awesomeness. Thank you, sir, for all the work you've done. Thank you for being on the show. It was a pleasure.
Was too.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Returning from wherever it is that he hails from, Purge, whose shaman's name is actually Surge now due to a server transfer and someone stole his name. Thank you, sir. Thought it was a pleasure. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, I wouldn't say he stole the name. I mean, he's had it for a while, but doesn't seem to play the character anymore, and I don't really have any way of contacting him since he's the other faction. So,
well, you know,
don't know. Whatever. It's just a name.
It's just the name, exactly. The rise of Surge, trending on Twitter. But thank you, thank you, thank you.
And
we have
Brunhilde.
one more episode, of course, to go for the regular junket of Warlords Draenor. We have Mages. Should be next Sunday. I have 4 guests that I'm currently looking at. I have Turkey, Koma, Kuni, and Psychobi, but like 2 of them have always been raiding, so I haven't been able to do a 3-guest show yet, so hopefully we can get them broken away from raiding so we can talk to them next week. If you have questions for Mages, please send them in right now, if you already haven't. If you have questions for our shaman friends, you can stick around for the after show. We'll be back in that for after a little bit of a break. I need some water. It is very hot in my house because my air conditioning is broken. Literally fire nova in my armpits. So thank you very much for watching, everybody, and we'll see you in the YouTube comments, see you on Twitter, and we'll see you next week or on the after show, or wherever we see you. And until then, guys, why? Come on, wave by word, because they can't see Purge wave. These nice people. Bye, everybody.